guy running with Latin. The guy run, my friend, but they're gonna catch him. You see that, my friend? They're gonna go get him. They're gonna go get him, my friend. Look.
What's up, fam? It's your boy Demuir here, purveyor of
Shit.
all sounds underground. Thank you for joining me on this YouTube Thursday, where I will be sharing my top 5 mixing mistakes that I avoid, and it's based on things I've learned in my journey as a DJ and producer in the electronic music field. But before we jump into those details, what I need from you is a bit of that SLC, please. So subscribe, like, comment, and don't forget to hit the notifications bell so you can stay in touch with what we have coming. Alright, so let's jump into the top 5 mixing mistakes I no longer make. You probably noticed my screen here looks quite different, and this is Logic 9 before we've moved on to Logic Pro X. And this was something I transitioned from, I think I started with Cubase, then I moved to Reason, and then I moved to Logic 9. So I was in here for quite some time. So when I decided to, return to music, I was very comfortable with Logic because it reminded me so much of Cubase from a window arrangement perspective and just the layout with the instruments here and whatnot. So let's give this a quick listen. And you know what? That actually doesn't sound too bad, but this was an idea I think I was sketching, and I just didn't bother pursuing it because once I got to Logic Pro X, I learned a number of things that I no longer do or have been doing when I was back in Logic Pro 9. So the first mistake that I no longer do is over compress. So I'm going to bring your attention to this section here. These are all of my buses. So I got a reverb, delay. I had a bus here for beats, something called a sample fattener at the time. And I got one for my kick snare, keys, and as well as one for percussion and bass line. And that's all fine and dandy, but the problem is every single one of these channels have some form of compression, and it's maddening when I think about this. Like, what in the world was I thinking? With the exception of this bassline bus here, it was just straight EQ, and I did a little reduction here and 25 hertz, but to have that amount of compression is just really crazy. And then to have all of that go into my master chain here, which is something I pulled off of Chocolate Puma at the time. They had an article in Music Tech, and they were sharing their advice on a perfect master chain, and this is just so ridiculous. And I'll do another video on that. But all this to say, after all of this compression, I had the signal going through even more compression treatment once it hit the master chain, which is completely maddening. And the problem with too much compression is that it just continues to stack and squash the sound as you go along. So, I mean, although this beat, it sounds alright, but I can hear, like, the hi-hat, for example, which is way too high, and it just sounds quite gritty. Like, I can tell it's just way too much compression happening. So that's the first one, way too much compression. So the second mistake that I used to make and no longer do, and it has nothing to do with the gear here, but certainly affects with the decisions that I used to make while mixing, was worrying about what others were doing. So I told you at the top, I got master chain and bus suggestions from an article I read on the Chocolate Puma guys. Great producers, but the mistake I made there was thinking, wow, if these guys are doing so well with all of their songs, that should all work for me. And that is true to some degree, but the mistake I made was, the very poignant fact was that they were making very different music than I was. My music, and still to this day, is very sample heavy. I dig for records and I clean up sounds and I infuse them in my productions and then play some live instruments over it. Whereas Chocolate Puma, a totally different approach. They would use samples sometimes, but a lot of their music was very instrument based. So having been worried about what other people thought and what they did in their projects was a huge mistake for me that I no longer do. And number 3, not really tied to what is actually going on in the machine here, but it's all about the environment. At the time, I didn't know about my room. I didn't have cool things like bass traps installed and, acoustic treatment in my room. I would always run and do the car test, which is cool, but it'll only take you so far. And when you think about the impact to your time, it just wasn't sufficient in the long run. So knowing my environment, I just kind of went in, put headphones on occasion and said, oh, it sounds good in my headphones. And I just moved ahead and started, rocking with the beats and listening to my car and then making minor adjustments. But at the end of the day, I didn't know what my room or environment was telling me. Like it has a bias towards 50 to 250 hertz, or because there's so much carpet and acoustic foam all over the room that it was absorbing the higher frequencies. So not knowing my environment certainly didn't help me in my mixes, which of course I no longer do because this room is very well treated. Next one is bad sounds. I would not necessarily worry about how I source sounds. This particular track, the sounds are pretty good here, but this is a perfect example. This is a drum kit that I have going through my EXS sampling instrument, and there are a number of drum sounds I triggered in here. We can do a close-up, and you'll see that, I got my open hat here, claps, kick, I think this is a snare over here. And the reality is what I did very wrong here is, although those sounds are good, the way I treated them was just very amateur. I have it all going through one track. And you can see here I have even more compression, although it's off right now. I just had an array of processing going on, like compression, high pass, distortion, and then some channel EQ, and you can see some crazy stuff going on in here. Like, this is shit I will not do ever today. So I'm so glad to be looking back at this and saying this is wonky. Like, I think like when you're EQing anything more than 2 to 4 dB in certain frequencies is telling you are working with a bad set of sounds, or you're not hearing things appropriately in your room, or you're over compressing, or you have all of the above happening in your mix, which is true for me. And it's astounding to me to be looking at this where I boosted this signal by 11 dB, but I did that because I had everything running through the same instrument patch, which is absurd. All the instruments should be separated and treated accordingly. So, bad sound management, I definitely did it. And last but not least is going in with the idea that the mastering engineer will just fix everything. I can't believe I'm saying this, but when I look back at this particular project, this is like circa 2000, like 2010-ish. I look back at this and I know that that was kind of my frame of mind because of all of the mistakes I was making in here and was continuing to make for such a long time, until I started asking for very pointed feedback from mastering engineers on how I can improve, and one of them said, send me a screenshot of of what's going on in your DAW. And I sent this, and he must have just fell off his chair because he came back with too much compression, way too much stuff going on in your master chain, which again I'll do a separate video on. But all of these mistakes combined, too much compression, not knowing what my room was doing in response to frequencies, making bad decisions in terms of the sound management and handling, and just paying way too much attention to what others were doing were killing me. So these are my top 5 mixing mistakes I will never make again. And looking back at this, it's so eye-opening and painful to look at the same time, but refreshing, because I do not do any of these things today. I'm actually more of a less is more person today, and I let the sounds sort of tell me how things should be treated based on what's going on sonically, in terms of what I'm receiving in my ears and what I see through other analytical tools. So anyway, that's it. Let me know your thoughts on this video about my top 5 mixing mistakes that I no longer make and overall just avoid completely. I'd be interested in your thoughts. If you got any questions, hit me up. I generally do try to get back to people within the first 24 hours of posting each video, so I'd be interested in your comments and feedback and any questions you may have. Much love and thanks. Peace.